Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the third edition of the world's largest Fintech festival, the Global Fintech Fest 2022, organized by National Payments Corporation of India, the Payments Council of India, and Fintech Convergence Council. This edition of the fest is supported by the Department of Economic Affairs, the RBI, and the IFSCA. This morning, while I was driving to the venue, I was just browsing through some quotes on security, and Matita Navratilova, the famous tennis star, recently said that security used to be an inconvenience sometimes, but now it's a necessity all the time. Yes. And another quote which I pretty much liked and thought it sets the tone for the day is that privacy, like eating and breathing, is one of life's basic requirements. And to talk about security as a whole this morning, we have an esteemed panel who will be talking about the modernizing cybersecurity approach to protect end customers. And moderating this session this morning will be Sandeep Tiwari, who is a senior specialist security architecture and Infosec at the National Payments Corporation of India. May I request Sandeep to please come on stage. Joining Sandeep will be Shri Saurabh Mishra, who is the Joint Secretary, Department of Financial Services, Government of India. Welcome, Saurabh ji. Joining them both will be Shri Brijesh Singh, who is the Additional Director General of Police, Maharashtra. Welcome, sir. We also have Mr. Anuj Bhansali, who is the Head Trust and Safety of PhonePe. Welcome, Anuj. We also have with us Mahavir Jindal, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Amazon. Welcome, Mahavir. And we also have with us Vineet K. Singh, who is the co-founder and CEO of Castler. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for doing this with us. May I now have Sandeep take it from here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Talking cybersecurity this early in the morning is like serving a spicy breakfast. So we are going to have some spicy things coming up on our side, but cybersecurity is a complex field. It keeps on evolving because the threats are evolving, and that is why there is a need to modernize things. It is important because threat actors are equally invested in finding out ways to breach us, and that makes it more important that we have a strategy on how we can take the things forward and modernize whatever we have currently and how to address them. So recently, the news of data leaks are very common. Recent example of Uber has also come up where the customer data was published on dark web. So that makes the data security for all fintechs and other organizations as well very important. But to modernize cybersecurity, it is equally important we understand how the threats are evolving. So I'll start my conversation based on that. I'll invite Brijesh to give some comments to us on how do you think the threats are evolving these days, and what are the things that threat actors are morely focused on when they are trying to exploit the gaps within the existing cybersecurity for organizations?
Sandeep, you rightly said that they are behind data. And as Mr. Ambani had said, data is the new oil. In fact, I had written an article which I said data is the inflammable oil. Ki oil hai to jalega bhi. And irony is that a data breach is not simply a data breach. So if you have, let's say, data, then it is basically the staging point for all kind of cyber operations. That you can, if I want to run an influence operation, I can create personas from there, right? I can give depth to those personas. If I want to run an automated attack on some infra, I can do a credential stuffing. So on and so forth. I can do an account takeover. So, or I can get foothold into an organization and start pivoting from there, then living off the land, doing lateral movement. So data breach is not just a data breach. So we hear about data breaches. We hear that ransomware actors now also leveraging, a kind of triple extortion by threatening you to release this data. So data again as a leverage is used. The irony is that we are looking at data breaches singularly, but it's not so. Because there are various kinds of actors who are behind this, and for various kinds of reasons. So it may be, if you look at the whole cyber kill chain mechanism, which is like a seven-step process, stages of process. Each one of them is modular, and each one of them relies on data. So somewhere, I think to protect the interest of the end user and consumer, we will need to securely focus on a mechanism that data is used in a way where even if it goes out, it cannot be used. For example, if you look at homomorphic encryption, so homomorphic encryption is that you will be able to work on encrypted data and still be able to use it. So somewhere we will have to come up with something, or like the way RBI is talking of tokenization of cards, or of the account aggregator system which is like doubly blind in the sense that it's a PKI infrastructure where there's a data aggregator which has encrypted data, but you can have a granular consent structure through which data can be used. So these are the innovations which need to be done, but data being the focal point, everybody is after data and that needs to be protected.
Thank you, sir. That's rightly put up. So I'll move to Anuj. Anuj, you are heading trust and safety for PhonePe. So customer data security is your prime concern. But what are the core threats that you see that comes from a fintech perspective that you see that are prevalent today?
So it's a very wide thing. It's not going to be a small topic at the end of the day. See, data is one part of it, as Sir was mentioning around, right? What you have to see is that entire end-to-end chain. So I think all of us are used to either receiving an SMS saying that earn part-time jobs, or it is about that, sir, do you want to invest in a stockbroking market? The issue and the challenges with fintech especially is, while we have been working towards making the services easily accessible, it has also opened up too many channels. Earlier you were limited by the number of channels in which you could avail any of these services. You would go physically to a bank, physically to an NBFC, submit some of these documents out. So it was more of a pull model, and today that changes to a push model. With a push model, the biggest challenges that we see around is, while there is a regulation, while there are people who would want to safeguard data, not everybody follows the same recipes out. And in fintechs now, given that you want to do, let's say, a digital lending, you want to do book building basis on multiple data formats instead of relying on traditional bank statements out. So all of that gives access to a lot more data. The challenge that comes around with this, how do you secure, both internally as well as external threat actors? Now, when I say that, why is that critical around? Externally, everybody knows, right? If somebody starts accessing my data, there's a data leak. Of course, there are brand repercussions to data theft and a lot of other things. What people miss out even inside the companies around is, how do you manage that internally? And when I say that, it is not about putting it into a centralized data lake and saying that now anybody and everybody can access, right? When you are launching a product, building a product, there will be very few people who need to have access controls around on that. They need to be the ones who are working on particular models. So within fintechs, the way I look at it is data at rest as well as data in transit. So in transit, I think most of the companies do secure. So right from a TLS and then an encryption behind that, so that even if somebody intercepts a request, that gets safeguarded. Data at rest is something which people need to have a lot more thought process around, and especially around data isolation. So there has to be central systems which resolve, that will allow controls to be enabled irrespective of fact who's accessing. So to give you an example, let's say if there is a user ID, now a user ID should be able to be resolved by only a single central system that should manage the access control, and corresponding parameters of that user ID can only be accessed once you have the user ID access. So I believe within fintechs, the threat that looms around is, how do you plan to control the usage of the purpose that you have collected the data for? So while today you might collect it for a purpose X, given that data is there, how do you stop anybody else from going ahead and redefining the scope of that?
Yeah, thank you. That's true that external and internal both threats are to be considered while thinking about your cybersecurity strategy. So coming to Vineet, as a CEO and a founder for Castler, how much mind space the cybersecurity strategy takes for you?
So look, in terms of mind space, it is omnipresent, right? Everybody in financial services, fintech especially, trust is the cornerstone of our business, okay? And the most important digital currency, even now it is, okay, people are getting a grip on it now, is digital trust. Okay, so without Castler is a very unique kind of a business. We are slightly contrarian to the traditional payments paradigm of zero time, zero touch, and zero cost. So we work. We don't believe in zero time. We don't believe in instant. We believe in fast. We don't believe in zero touch. We believe in friction, and we don't believe in zero cost. We believe in revenue. Because if we are solving critical problems, it takes cost, resources, manpower to develop those services, solutions and services, and somebody's got to pay for it, right? So what we have built is a very unique kind of a system. And look, this is a very neglected criteria. People will come, bhashan denge, etc., and so on. But at the core level, I do a startup. I start. What do? I start looking for funds at idea stage, right? Pre-idea bhi hota hai, idea bhi hota hai, whatever. Nobody asks you about platform security. Nobody asks you about your privacy policy. Nobody asks you, right? Okay. So at the investor level, there are no questions asked at all. We work with banks. They ask hard questions. They ask you to tick the right boxes, and then only they will partner with you. Customers, yes, they have started asking the right questions and the hard questions as well. That what kind of data will you store? How do you store it? How secure it is? They've started asking in our line of business, we do escrow banking. They've started asking for even agreements. Okay, so we have to give undertaking and give it in writing that how do we store, secure, and use their data in that sense. So I think it is omnipresent. It is extremely important. It is top agenda. But it's got to be fixed. It's a neglected area, okay? It's also a question of, it's not only my intent as the founder and the CEO, it's about resources. Paisa bhi lagta hai, log bhi lagte hain, right? So, like we have two senior government representatives here. Last week, somebody contacted me from some ministry and said, Vineet, you apply, there are good chances, and you will get 20 lakh rupees grant, no questions asked. Maybe the government should not give any grant like this. The grant should be about go and get your Infosec done. And something like that, right? Usme bhi 20-25 lakh rupees lag jate hain. It's a 12-month kind of a journey, maybe more as well, depending upon the kind and the nature of the business. So this is a beast that we have to learn to grapple with. It is not only about, you can say, malicious individuals and criminal gangs. It is about state actors as well. Okay, so it is not that at a platform level, even $100 billion companies cannot, you can say, give it in writing that they will never get hacked and there will never be data breaches. So this is a very, very, you can say, omnipresent kind of a threat and problem. Has to be looked at it on a daily basis in a different kind of a manner. So, and we've got to take a look at it when startups get incorporated, okay? When the first tie-ups are happening, fintech partnerships are happening, etc., and other stuff. So that's where I think the ball is getting dropped. Yeah.
Thank you, Vineet. That's an important insight. So I'll pivot the discussion to Saurabh, sir, towards you, that in capacity as CISO and CTO for DFS, and you sit at the heart of policy making, what would be the roadmap for a fintech in the point that Vineet made about strategizing towards their cybersecurity program?
Thanks. So let me just take a little tangent to the discussion that we've been having. To my mind, at a country level, I think we are having a bit of a phase lag between our journey of digital and fintech versus cyber, which we did not have. And what that phase lag is doing is creating a series of snowball effect at the borders, which are the cyber borders of the country. And within that, as my panelists said, that within the country, state actors getting into the act, and as Brijesh was saying, that they are becoming, I think, increasingly sophisticated. So we have got a task cut out. In fact, we have dropped the ball not just till date, including in this council, where the cybersecurity is being given a day 4 on a small session of less than 100 people. And I don't mince words on that. So I think very, very clearly, there is something which we are too much romantic and glamorized about, which is how to make India digital, without thinking that what is the underbelly of it. And therefore, my colleague from the police would straight away bear it out with me that this is one thing we are having towards another syndrome with which we are almost conceding a deficit of 10 to 20 years vis-a-vis some of the countries which we could have beaten in this field, which is the best of Western Europe or the best of USA. We are constantly getting into that concede mode once again if we are not almost on an overnight basis or SOS basis, and not just at a policy level, at an individual level, at an enterprise level, at a regulator level, think about it. And I can keep giving use cases. Let me just take 2 use cases. Digital lending issue occurred last year, 2021. We were scurrying for who is the one who will fix it. Now, this is not a great problem to really be getting into. And then, with great effort, we are bringing in our RBI colleagues on board that, okay, so long as you are managing the regulated entity, this is something which we can create a bit of a trail effect to a 3rd deep or a 4th deep. Chances are that if you're able to do that, that is where we can go to the Googles and Amazons and, Apples of the world and say, hey, this is the only legit lending of India. Everything else, therefore, by the Venn diagram theory, becomes illegit. It's as simple as that. So sometimes we are possibly attempting to jargonize a lot of things and trying to have our own corridors of, or maryadas of, where we should operate in, rather than seeing the problem which is hitting at almost at, the speed of a typhoon to India. Anybody who will see us into those corridors of the top 3 nations in the world in next 25 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever way, will feel bad about it. It's a space issue which everybody is, is kind of occupied with. So to that extent, if we are not on an SOS basis getting into such use case assumptions, assimilations, analysis, and resolution, I think we have got a task at out. On dividing the cyber issue, I think it cuts into all 3 areas. Areas about the 60 to 65% of the cyber attacks. I'm sure all of you would know that, and so is the esteemed audiences here. Is done through the ignorance. हमने कोई गलत ईमेल खोल लिया, कोई गलत मैसेज पे रिस्पॉन्ड कर दिया, किसी गलत आवाज़ को पहचाना नहीं, and so on. And by the way, I'm sure that you would agree that 65-70% of India will also turn digital, which is the rural India, if we are thinking about digital India. And those guys, therefore, need to be process preserved rather than awareness preserved. उनको कितना समझाएंगे आप? मतलब, just imagine, some of you will have the rural roots around that. So it's important that we have got a strategy very clearly cut out and not just at a policy. As I say, that all 3 of us are together. The regulators and law enforcement agencies on one hand, policy on the other hand, and industry on the third hand. In order to get that 1.4 billion Indians that feed, which is a cyber secure digital feed. NPCI has got a role to play. They are sitting here. They've been a part of this concept process. In some of our discussions, we've been thinking about how do we create trails around it where the law enforcement agencies can really, take on to the next level. There are agencies like intelligence bureaus and so on and so forth who are absolutely okay to kind of think through it. And to the point of wherever we need to introduce that trustlessness in terms of the transaction trails, it's time that we introduced it. Possibly we ended up hitting with the most inflammable use case of blockchain, that is crypto. There are 1,000 other use cases which we could have hit upon and made it more democratized. So my sense is that I think it's time that we really thought the country not losing the steam on cyber and possibly catching up with the steam with which it has gone digital. If we are continuously having a phase like we are heading for a snowball effect, which possibly great chances are it becomes more of a fad rather than a way of life called Digital India or a FinTech India.
Thank you, sir. Well,
I'll add just something to
yeah, sure, sir.
So, wonderful paradigm which Saurabh ji has put forth is of phase lag. See, last time we had this phase lag, when our prosperity was ahead and security was behind, just look at 1800s. We were 26% of the world trade. What happened? Somebody subjugated and took us over. If you look at our history, wherever our prosperity has gone ahead of our security, we have been subjugated. And here we are at a place where we do not want to be digitally colonized.
Excellent comparison, sir. So, Mahavir, I'll come to you, sir. As Saurabh sir just said, that security should not be an afterthought. How do you think that as in your capacity of COO for Amazon Pay, cybersecurity can contribute as an enabler for the business objectives and can be taken on priority?
Interesting. So I'm not an expert on cybersecurity. I run operations for Amazon Pay. But our approach has been very, very different. So part of the stuff which Brijesh sir mentioned about tokenization. So I'll just talk about a few things that we do differently which affect operations positively with relation to cybersecurity. So one interesting thing that we do in Amazon is that data at rest, transit, all of it is always encrypted. But beyond that, the core data lies in its pure form. Its usage across different systems is tokenized. So let's say your card number will never be visible on any Amazon system. It's stored in a vault, which is protected. Nobody else has access to it. Whichever APIs access it needs to tokenize it and use it in subsequent systems. So what that does is that we believe in making systems open and accessible, but the core data at risk is always very, very secure. And there is a super high bar. Operationally, it does create some challenges. So for example, if a customer is calling you and we want to authenticate the customer, and if I'm not able to validate his address, that becomes a problem. So we do have compromises where we break data into components, and limited components are made visible to authenticate on the front end screens. But the core data always remains protected. Slows us down operationally, but I think it's something which is important. Second thing which we do differently is, as all of us called out, the threat landscape is just everywhere. Now you can't scale your headcount to support that evolving threats. You need to invest in automation. So one thing which I really want to talk about is how have we done some of those things. We used to have logs in our security operations center across applications, channels, and there was just so much to do there. So what we did was we collated logs across applications, across perimeter logs, across channels, across 3P partners that we work with, and we've built an AI and ML model which analyze those logs and tell me which are the highest threat risk events. And not only identification, even the remediation now is automated. So we don't have like 50 people looking at big screens and saying this is what is happening. Our approach towards cybersecurity has been modernized because AI and ML take care of a lot of this stuff. Another example that we do is that since there are so many APIs and services which we keep rolling out all the time, the assessment of everything was becoming very linear and the go-to-market was getting slowed down. So we took a very different approach. What we did was that we looked at all the possible security controls that we need to embed in any service. And we automated assessment of those controls. So, and that assessment process is inbuilt into our code deployment pipelines. So any code which is deployed in any system in Amazon is going through that pipeline with automated risk assessment for every service, and those risks are queued for remediation by the respective teams. So that has allowed us to run a little faster, and whenever a new risk is detected, you keep updating those libraries and the automation perpetuates. So our approach towards cybersecurity has hinged upon one large thesis, which is automation, because that's how you will scale. Second approach that we want to talk about is secure by default, which means that at launch things have to be perfect. You can't take a risk and say, I will roll this out and then subsequently fix it. Because repetition is super important for Amazon. So I know it tends to slow down things, but given the automations that we talked about, we've been able to mitigate that to a large extent. So all our code deployment pipelines, like I said, have gates which are mandatory to be crossed before services are rolled out into production. Let's say if there is a data pack which a service entails, which contains PII data, we have designed a concept called conformance packs. So those conformance packs which talk about location, resilience, and various aspects pertaining to those data sets are bundled into the service deployment so that when a designer or a developer is coding, he has to factor those into the code, otherwise the code will not even deploy. So I think some of those techniques which we are ensuring secure by default are also helping us manage the operational overhead of cybersecurity a little better. I don't know whether this addresses some of your questions.
No, definitely. Vineet, please go ahead.
Just wanted to add a small point. Look, for consumer, security is not only about tokenization of credit card. I don't think credit card transactions constitute even 1% of the total transactions, right? So it is more about, I think, Aadhaar card, PAN card. You do a Google search on my company, you will find the GST, CIN, DIN, all details, okay, just floating around out in the public. So I think fraud, I think 90%, maybe 95% fraud in India is happening because of Aadhaar card. okay, where people ask for your Aadhaar card and send you QR codes to scan, etc., and so on. Big real estate scam is going on right now. You put up your listing for rent, and somebody calls you and says, "Hey, look, I want to take your, I want to pay you advance now, and I want to do a ₹1 test transaction," and so on. And there are gullible people. We are a unique country. We have our own challenges. उससे हम दूर तो भाग नहीं सकते हैं that way. So it has to go beyond that as well. That companies like Amazon has been my most admired company, have been a customer since 2000. Even now, when I'm not happy with Amazon India customer service, I call up the US helplines and they still help out. So, so they are, you can say, an example for a lot of us on how to build businesses in a lot of other factors. But I think in terms of data security for Indians as such, it's just not about card security. It is about other generic information as well, okay, which might have consequences. We've had cases of morphed usage of PAN numbers, GST fraud, etc., and other stuff as well. Okay. Another small example, maybe esoteric, is like how the large companies, Amazon Pay and PhonePe, etc., work. So when you download the app, you are asked to give access to everything. पूरी जिंदगी का access दे दीजिए. Okay. So you guys manage and work billion-dollar businesses. Resources are not a constraint. For every project, you can deploy hundreds of engineers. Why can't the access be real time? जब ज़रूरत पड़े, then you take the access in that sense. Why does it have to be permanent? You want storage access, you want media files access, you want music files access, SMS access. Some unicorns are taking email access as well, etc., and so on in that sense. So maybe somebody needs to take the lead here and make it real time, that Vineet logs into Amazon Pay and for a certain transaction, at that very time, I give the access, transaction is over, I get a ping that, okay, the access has been revoked or it has been stopped.
Right. So the industry term that we use in NPCI is just-in-time access and just enough access that is to be given from application perspective as well. That's a solid point. Yes. So, yes. So I'll circle back to you, Anuj. Apart from the traditional approach that is there, considering the volumes that you handle, how do you think that modernizing cybersecurity takes place at PhonePe?
Okay. So just before we jump to that question, interestingly, we have actually taken that as an approach. And what we are doing is launching a consent service within the app that if you are giving a consent for a particular use case, it is only used for that and you can revoke access. Doesn't mean the services get impacted. So that's something have always been on mind and also been working on the account aggregator framework to deliver these kind of services out for the general masses out. So coming back to your question around on what does cybersecurity entail? So I think I talked about the internal risk. Now let me talk from the external perspective out. From an external perspective, if you look at it, typically the traditional approach was towards securing your infrastructure, right? Be it your email of your employees to phishing attacks to making sure all of that is covered out. As I was talking about the channel points or access points, they were limited out. So you had either a bank website to go around and transact on, or you basically were using a physical channel to access some of these out. It was easier to deploy and constrain access around on that. Now, why does that change? What has fundamentally changed in the last half a decade or 7 or 8 odd years that we have been observing around? Everything has moved to mobile first. Now, I think even if I step out without my wallet, without my PAN card, ID card, you have a DigiLocker for your documents, you have, let's say, the payment apps which you're doing for. So everything is right there in your hand. That brings another set of challenges out. Now, why do I say that brings another set of challenges is, typically in the earlier infrastructure, you were the one who was deploying that infrastructure, right? So you had a release control around on that. You always had access controls around what will I enable, what will I not enable or disable as features out. Given the fact that now it is in every mobile phone, given the fact it's on the individual user, so that is where the challenges come in. Now you have a variety of devices which are coming in, right? You have from your tablets to laptops to IoT enabled, God knows what all. How do you end up securing all of this? The other thing which most of the cybersecurity professionals have not been focusing around, while it is a key call out that human is the weakest link out, right? I think time and again we have seen that happening around is RBI has been saying that for last 20 years, do not share your OTP. Just a simple example, people still do share your OTP and people still get defrauded. So it is not about awareness at the end of the day. Awareness will take you to a certain level. Even when there was a financial transaction involved, the awareness hasn't held really much, right? People still get socially engineered. So when we're talking about a cyber security, I think the onus now grows much more on the companies, on the regulators to prescribe the right approaches. So some very key examples that are like innocent looking softwares which get misused by, so nobody thought a TeamViewer or an AnyDesk will become a malicious software, but it ended up happening, right? There are SMS forwarder apps which people ask you to social engineer and install out. At the end of the day, this is all happening on the edge, which is the device in the consumer's hand. And now the cybersecurity paradigm has to shift from looking at an internal infra or a static or to a much more realistic, dynamic, at runtime kind of a security, so that your devices are secure. How do you make sure that the app that is running in a secure environment? How do you make sure that there's nobody else who's taking access control of that? So I think that is what fundamentally changes when you start talking about a billion plus transactions or a billion people coming online for doing these transactions.
Right. So, yeah. So you have rightly put out, mobile is now the hostile environment for any application to run, so you should not trust anything onto that. But you brought out some challenges also. Brijesh sir, I'll come back to you. You are credited with modernizing the Maharashtra Police Cybersecurity Cell. You set up CCTS and all that. What are the challenges that you faced while you were on this project, of modernizing Maharashtra Police Cybersecurity in particular?
Saurabh would agree to me that government is a much more complex animal than a profit-centered enterprise, because you have so many masters to answer to. And also, data in government is in various forms. Like he's talking about multiplicity of devices. When we were implementing CCTNS, we found that if you want to write Prakash Ramesh Patil, this very name can be written in 17 different ways with spelling errors, right? Now, how do you even come to a clean database? Now, and that requires effort. Ironically, in government, so we do not, I'll say this very boldly, that we haven't sorted out purchasing of services and purchasing of technology. So, though we have come to things like QCBS and all, still government is one of the largest spenders in the space of technology and cybersecurity, but we haven't gotten our act right, because our all financial rules, GFRs, everything is Angrezi wala, it's like Angrezo ke zamane ka. And something which was suited to purchasing egg bora cement, you can't use it to, purchase real-time services. Now, with those encumbrances, when you want to implement something, again, the internal governance structures are not the kind of DevOps you need. Let us say if you are implementing GST or implementing CCTNS or something like that. Now, if you want changes there, the governance structure is with people who do not understand technology. And it's very difficult to talk that language. And the irony is that everything again is tenure based. So whatever you do in your tenure may be very well lost by somebody who has an absolutely different approach to things. So somewhere government again has to get its act together. And I think as my friend was talking about Aadhaar, see Aadhaar, I spoke day before yesterday also, was never meant to be a card. It was meant to be a biometric identity. Yeah, number, biometric identity, and API authentication service. Some smart Alex made a card of it, I said that earlier also, put your dirty photos on that also. And then somebody takes a picture of this, uploads it to an unsecure S3 bucket, which is available everywhere on the web, right? And you just go to Shodan or something and everything is like, the underbelly of the world is exposed, pre-hacked, available to you. Yes. So with this, then come to government databases. And with so many masters, with a governance structure which is difficult to implement, with technology which is difficult to purchase, and with oversight which actually sort of cripples the purchase of, acquisition of technology, it is very, very difficult to operate in the government. However, I really am amazed at what NPCI and others have been able to do, while I should say that there have been other precursors which I should say have disastrously failed in the field of technology in government. But I feel that somewhere one needs to understand that government data is much more important than any commercial data set. So once I was dealing with a data breach and I spoke to another government servant, he said, "Kya hai? Public ka data hai."
Okay.
Right?
What was that?
Public ka data hai, kya farak padta hai? And it is openly available. I said, that is the problem, because this data is something which can be misused in so many ways. Now, somewhere we'll need to, first of all, go for basic cybersecurity education everywhere. We talk of educating the people. We are giving these technologies to people, and we ask about educating them. Within the government, first of all, you have to educate the decision makers. And ironically, I find that there is a huge gap there, a huge gap in understanding, a huge gap in perception. And if we don't get our act right, we are going to be vulnerable. So somewhere we need to have an approach in governance where we need to understand that cybersecurity is something which is neither an impediment nor an encumbrance, but an essential part of your whole process even before you start. Right. So I was discussing with him where he said that, in let's say even for investigation of cyber crimes today, one part takes place, second part takes place somewhere else. The money mules are in some 9 different states, and the money jumps 9 accounts before it is taken out.
Right.
Now when you want to investigate it, यहाँ की पुलिस जामताड़ा बात करेगी कि मेवात बात करेगी कहाँ करेगी, and that's going to take months. And thank God if I have to take data from, let's say, a Facebook or something, they're going to put me through loops of 91 CRPC and never going to reply to it.
Right.
So we will need to have a real-time approach even for investigation.
Right.
But that we don't have. We need to, post-haste, get our act together.
Right, right. So you are rightly put up. So Saurabh sir, coming to you, what are the things that we should immediately take up from the cybersecurity perspective? You said that it is coming as an afterthought for the country as a whole, but what are the immediate things that all organizations should take up immediately to reach up to a certain level of ease that they can provide to, and a confidence to the customer that their data is secure?
Yeah, so I'll just take a leaf from what Brijesh ji said. I think at the governmental and the policy making level, including the ones which are called the policy enforcement and so on and so forth, including the LEAs, I think it's time that we have kind of an on-the-go approach rather than a post-mortem or a post-facto approach. We get this right, but then we get it right once the damage is done, and we don't even know the measure or the magnitude of this. And hence this example which I took of the digital lending. We're almost getting there in terms of getting the act right, getting the MIT together, MHA together, DFS together, RBI finally agreeing on, taking on board and blah, 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 and so on. So we will get there. We will create those Venn diagrams. So this is the right lending and this is not the right lending, so on and so forth. As it is, by the way, I think whenever we do such things, we should understand that ultimately the core has to be done. Digital and fintech are the apparatuses. Right. The core is that somebody's lending money, somebody's borrowing money. Digital lending, the surname is lending, right. which is, and I think we go by our surnames, right, across the world. Yeah. So therefore, which is a regulated activity, as simple as that. Payment is a regulated activity by Payment and Settlement Act. Let's not unnecessarily glamorize this, hit the root of where the problem lies. On the strategy, I think, yes, there are 2 or 3 pronged strategies that you are looking at. One, and the most important part, as Brijesh said, is that awareness at all levels. So even if OTPs are still being given, the fact remains that the education should continue. And the day those people who understand OTP is not given are outnumbering those people who feel that they should be given, we'll have the new India coming up. And I think we cannot get it right without the 60 to 70 to 80% of our Indians getting into that mode कि यार जो मेरा purpose नहीं है मैं क्यों दे रहा हूँ. Second is, I think, a wonderful example from the Amazon side. I was just thinking about it. We will think how we can think about those confirmation packs and all. It's a great way that whenever we are doing a programming, a responsible programming, whenever we are doing a launch, a responsible launch, whenever Apple and Google allow someone and just take a very smart swipe that we are just a platform. No, you are not. You are more than that. We all know that. So I think it's more of a responsibility with which the techno providers, techno consumers, and the techno enforcers have to really tango with each other. We are in touch between us and MIT on very serious matters on how to really look at the best of RBI Act and the IRDA Acts and so on, along with the Ministry of IT Act and so on and so forth. The last point what Brijesh ji said, I think it's equally important that even our LEAs are on the go. in terms of assimilating and understanding the issues which are coming up, and then try to really find some ways out. NPCI consumes 70 out of the 100 retail transactions through the UPI route. Everybody has a responsibility on, and last but not the least, we don't go out without any cloth on our body. All of us look clothed, yeah? Cyber should be that cloth to any digital application. If it is not cyber secure, it cannot go out. That's the kind of internal vow or a shapath we should take to insight, some of the youngsters sitting in, let's not go unclothed. We don't. We feel embarrassed, right? We all are clothed here. We are civil. So this should be the civility that digital and fintech should take.
So the core idea of security at NPCI is to always verify before you trust. So that's what we follow for all the projects that we take up. Vineet, I will come back to you that if given, to the audience who are here with us, what are the top 3 things that should be picked up, from the cybersecurity perspective, every organization, that these should be the top 3 priorities for them?
So look, I'm no cybersecurity expert personally, okay? Neither do I run large billion-dollar enterprises, so it's a very humble startup that we do. Like when we started out, the business remained at idea stage for a long time. बहुत सारे लोगों को समझ में नहीं आया escrow banking, and I think what we are building is a socially good, responsible, but for-profit business naturally. Everybody in India should use escrow because it will help them protect their money 100%. So banks started asking us about security, safety, etc. So we built a very unique kind of a platform. The transaction management happens we tick the right boxes as far as Infosec, etc. Naturally, all these things, that's why banks worked with us. But still we worked a 2-tier platform. Transaction management happens on the Castler servers. But the entire financial transactions and payouts, one has to log into the bank servers and then the transaction happens. Like I will be, you can say, running significantly ahead of myself if we say that our capabilities are as good as any private banks. Okay, let's say as the larger banks. So we rely on the larger banks and their, you can say, internet and digital infrastructures to, you can say, commit to our customers that it will be very safe. Okay. And during its journey, it's a journey, right? It requires money, resources, people. So during its journey, at an individual level, at an individual Castler business level, we will get there. But we are very responsible, you can say, executors. Like we partner with banks, and it's just not for namesake. I think fintech has a very bad name because we are, I think, proving it to the world that we cannot do responsible, disciplined execution. जैसा ही मौका मिलता है, we stretch the rubber band. Okay, in that sense. So that is not the way it should be, okay? Because we are in a way building the financial infrastructure of new India, okay, which will last for the next couple of centuries. So today, as of today, we are sitting on 200 crores a day of business, okay? We will convert hardly 12-15% of that because our banking partners will say that no, Vineet, this is not a business worth doing. These are risky use cases. Here you will not find it, you will find it almost impossible to find out a source of money, okay? Identity of the actors who are doing the transactions. So you've got to talk honestly, execute honestly, take the feedback of your partners, not just for namesake. And a lot of my investors also, I don't know how much they like me, etc. and so on. I tell them, look, this is a 10-15 year kind of a journey and a road, okay? So you got to believe in this slightly solid execution, that we will let some business go, we will do high quality business. That's the paradigm of how I work and run Castler.
Thank you, thank you. Those are things that, all fintechs or the organization should take up, that cybersecurity can never be an afterthought. So I'll ask, I think considering the time, a last question to you, Mahavir, that how operational sides, because I being a cybersecurity professional know there is a lot of pushback that comes from the operations that don't do this, don't do that how in Amazon Pay you tackle this thing, that how you take cybersecurity as an ingrained thing of operation.
So, great question. So first thing what we do, at least the CISO for Amazon Amazon Security works very closely with me. He has a dotted line. So it becomes my responsibility also to make sure everything is protected by default. So that helps in aligning priorities. But keeping that aside, we in Amazon are very cognizant that this is like like what you were saying, you need to be clothed if you want to go out. So that approach has never been a discussion. The discussion was always how much time are you taking, and therefore what at least I have tried to index on is how do we reduce the time to market so that the business doesn't feel disruption and the risks are also mitigated. So that's one approach that we have taken. Second, on the operation side, whenever there is a service which requires data, the assessment of that service has been standardized into a model, and that model has also been automated. And like what I was talking about, the conformance packs, those model requirements have been embedded into the development pipeline itself. So at an operating level, it doesn't really bother me, because by default, whatever is getting rolled out is meeting my requirements and my customer requirements. The trade-off which I feel in cybersecurity that we need to make, which I'm a little more worried about, is firstly at the customer side, because what we talked about is largely enterprise internally, but at the customer side, a lot of our controls which we rely on are very prescriptive, like OTP, which exposes us to risks where the devices are, where the bad actor can use malicious malware, because the boundaries of cybersecurity historically, which were like what you were saying, a banking site, etc., are evaporating. So with evaporating boundaries, you cannot have the same prescriptive controls. Your controls need to be more dynamic. So what worries me is my inability to sometimes look at external parameters which give me a better assurance and challenge those. So let's give you an example. Let's say your device has been, your OTP has been compromised by a bad actor, and the bad actor is initiating a transaction through another channel. Now that device has not interacted with me in the past. Now what I would like to do is, I would not rely on OTP alone as the authentication for that. I would want a higher risk assurance. And sometimes I feel as an operations guy, I get constrained because OTP is the challenge mechanism for me. And if I introduce another challenge to that same customer, then my conversion becomes a problem. So that prescriptiveness of controls rather than proportionate risk-based control is an area which, as an operations leader, I worry about. And we are trying to solve it in different ways, but I'm not happy where we are right now. Second big problem that we struggle with operations, which worry me, is that while we talk about secure by default and making sure that those are embedded in the code, I have seen instances where risks are being taken. Okay? Those conscious risks are being taken, which I know there has been an assessment, due diligence process, all those have been followed. But I'm not very comfortable that those risks still exist with me, because it's not that they're decreasing, they're only increasing. So there's a tax which we need to pay, and in our urgency to roll out things, that tax is accumulating. So I know it just worries me a little more as an operations leader that, hey, this is something which we should address. We need to pay that tax sometime. And that day, I don't know when it will come, but I'm hoping early next year we should do something. So these are the two larger concerns, not really rollout of features and services, which I think operationally we are well designed for.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are very important inputs that you have given. I think what we believe at NPCI and for all the control should be designed for, not for the intelligent users, but for the no-wise users, the first-time users that are coming in. And that should be the core thought which we should bring in about modernizing cybersecurity. I think we can go for some audience questions.
Steps I think organizations should take. I was just thinking, what's the fear factor? Because I think today, while with all these efforts, people are going to be more aware, organizations are going to be more aware, they will put in more automation, everything will happen. But there are still going to be incidents, there are still going to be scenarios where people are going to indulge. We are humans, end of the day. How are we, so, and maybe so up to you, is that how are we structured constitutionally to take care of those events when they happen? Because, there's a joke around, if you do a fraud, do a big number, because eventually you pay a small part of it and get out of it. So how is that shaping us for us as a country? Because there has to be some prohibitive mechanism to also install fear to some extent.
In law, they say that the certainty of punishment is more important than the severity, right? And somewhere there we lack. Because we are not certain whether we'll be able to take it to the logical conclusion. More so in cyberspace. Look at compulsory reporting, okay? For example, certain said that you have to report within 6 hours. And look at the kind of furor that happened, that this is anti-innovation and that within 6 hours it's not possible to. We are talking about everything real time and we don't want to report incidents within 6 hours also. And if, from a law enforcement side, let me take a very narrow view. For example, ransomware gangs or anybody, there's a huge criminal infrastructure of syndicated cybercrime that is evolved over the world. Now, if we are not going to report, if it is not going to be investigated, how do we bring it down? So, this is a whole cycle. Now, you will again come to say that today it's very difficult to go and register a cybercrime. I understand that. Because it's a question of capacity and capability both. Because frankly speaking, if you start, we were having an internal discussion, if you start registering it, you'll have thousands of cases per day. Now, do we have that kind of capability? Do we have that kind of capacity? It's us as society who has to generate this. Maybe you'll have to go and talk to your representatives and lawmakers and everybody and tell them that we need to develop this kind of capabilities of a real-time response, taking it to logical conclusion where there is certainty of the outcome.
I don't think it's a question about enabling legislations. I think those are there. It's about enforcement. And if you have consistent enforcement, you would have deterrence. Not so much about the quantum, I view. It's, in my view, about the consistency. Completely agree with sir.
Yes.
We have time for just one more question and then we'll summarize the session. Yes, please.
Yeah, so just before I actually ask my question, I think you mentioned it's a small room, and honestly, this is one of the most real conversations we've had, so I think it helps when it's in a smaller room. My question is really, so I've actually found breaches over the last 1.5, 2 years in very big companies. I'm talking about Tata Sky, Chroma, Covi Find, Covi Self, Hamleys. The challenge I faced was always reaching out to these companies, right? And firstly, actually, when my first breach was Tata Sky in December 2020, my question was, am I even okay to report it? What is ethical hacking? I started reading up about ethical hacking online to make sure it was legal, and there weren't too many provisions around it. So one is we spoke about bad actors, but what about good actors? Right? People who want to actually just get these issues fixed. There weren't mechanisms. Now to reach out to Covi Find as an example, I actually had to find the promoter's number within the database, reach out to him. First he got actually agitated at me, saying, how did you get my number? Then after I told him there are security issues, he was in deniability. And eventually he asked me, hey, can you help me fix it? And even today then he calls me up for product related questions. Right? So the question is really more about policy-wise, is ethical hacking something we can frame something around? Because I believe the US has some laws, in India it's a little gray. Enforcement-wise as well, and also does Amazon have a role to play? Because if you have all these capabilities, AWS is 40-45% of the market share. If some of these security capabilities can be released as a service, a lot of the smaller startups don't have the benefits to encrypt stuff and everything else. And these were simple open APIs, by the way. I didn't do anything complicated. They were open APIs. I'll tell you, the Tata Sky breach was very simple. I went to the website to recharge my subscriber ID, and I realized the minute you enter my mobile number, you can see my name without an OTP. Right? For me, that first just gave me a database of people with their numbers and names. Right? And the minute I did that, I entered, they had a long-lived token. They didn't even have a OAuth 2.0. Right? So there was no refresh token mechanism, nothing. So all I did was, I said, okay, let me use my token and now let me access the other APIs. With my token, all the APIs actually had a mobile number field as an input. So even though they had my token, they had a mobile number field. Right? Now I said, okay, how do I go and create a database of people I know, or like people in Bombay? So I went and figured out the mobile number formats in India. I went to the early Vodafone 9800 series, 98200, those series, and I just went from 0000000 to 999999. There was no API rate limiting. Right? So I'm talking about very basic things. These were not even complicated. I'm not even a cybersecurity expert personally. Right? But I'm just a developer who knows how to kind of access some of these things, and it was all, like I could build a database and I went out and reached out to them. So actually more about policy, enforcement. And
sure. So on the policy side, I think Ministry of IT has got some roles, and in fact, drawing a leap from what Brijesh said, it kind of sits between something what through the constitution we call it allocation of business, which Cabinet Secretariat fixes it up for us. So there is, I won't say a ball draw, but there is a ball distributed on those sides. But yes, I think there is a cognizance that why ethical hacking should not become a way of life in terms of the policy and legislative part of it, and there are things which are being discussed. On the enforcement side also, there is a kind of rethought developing as we speak today at the MHA level, connected to some of these top 3 or 4 most hacked industries, including mine. So, which is the DFS side of banking, insurance, and financial institutions. So I think there is a thought developing, but I think we'll be very happy that such thought processes also converge into some, real narrative of a page in terms of the problem statement, which is of minus 10 years old, which is still available as a problem statement. It's only growing. And in 10 years, we will see the real outcomes of it for the disaster part of it. So I think it's a good idea that such discussions also are framed into a narrative and then put across. But as we speak, the work has begun. In terms of thinking about it, there is something called cyber minimum or a baseline cyber that is again being discussed. There is a thought around image which each company or an enterprise, Amazon, Mahavir will straight away bear it out with me. So they can't open their machines, most good organizations, unless that image kind of takes them from the BIOS setup right till the journey of your computer or smart machine, whatever smart machine you are into, for you to get into the antivirus definition part of it or the Active Directory part of it or whatever you are doing is having some level of a gatekeeping around it, which to my mind is as important as touching the machine.
And just to add to what Sir was saying, so I think we do bug bounty programs. So I don't know whether there is a enabling or a disabling constraint from legislation, frankly, on this, because I know we do it. And I would have assumed, and that does get good participation, so I would encourage you also to participate there. And I know multiple other global organizations also do this.
In India, that's not very common. You're right. Yeah. All the big ones do it. HackerRank also exists for actually reporting from these. In India, most of the companies actually don't have a mechanism, and especially traditional large organizations who've gone online, and which is mostly what you'll see during COVID happening. And I think big tech does have a role to play. Primarily because y'all are always at the forefront of actually developing tech. AWS is probably used by most people in India as well to develop. So I hope it's there, but it doesn't exist.
And on, yeah. So, but I'm seeing that change because I know most of the banks, while it's not launching bug bounty, but they do have an ethical hack program every quarter for releases which are customer facing. So I know some of the organizations do, but you're right, it's very nascent in the journey. On AWS infrastructure security, I'm not an expert, but I know that when we deployed an AWS instance, it guides you through all the capabilities that you have, which allows you to leverage those encryption and security protocols. And it's up to you to choose. I'm not so sure how easy those configurations are for a layman or a novice to understand, but at least we were very happy because we were moving from our native data center into an AWS environment for India because of localization constraint. And I thought the capabilities were extremely good, and not only assessment of the risk, but also the visualization layer I thought was very impressive. So, yeah.
Just thank you so much. We're crucially behind time, but some very interesting sound bites coming out of the panel this morning. I would like to just share some of them with you. So Brijesh ji mentioned that and spoke about how data is the inflammable oil, and that data breaches should not be looked at singularly. Data has to be protected, its period, and prosperity and security, and how we have to guard against being digitally colonized. Anuj also spoke about data at rest and data in transit, and how data at rest in particular needs central systems that are better controlled. Vineet interestingly spoke about the trust, that trust is the cornerstone of their business, and customers have started now asking tough questions on data security. It's a beast we need to grapple with, and access needs to be need not be permanent, as he mentioned. Saurabh ji gave an interesting soundbite about the phase lag between digital, fintech, and cybersecurity, and we may have considered a deficit of about 2 decades in this space. However, we have our task cut out. He also mentioned that rural India needs to be process preserved, which is an interesting observation, and we should not lose steam on cybersecurity. Awareness at all levels is necessary, and cybersecurity should be the clothes we wear when we get out there digitally, which is an interesting point of view. And lastly, Mahavir said that core data is always secure at Amazon, and the threat landscape is ever evolving. and therefore they've built AI and ML models where remediation also has been automated. So interesting sound bites, and I concur with the gentleman there who said that this is one of the better sessions that we've seen the last couple of days. Thank you, gentlemen, for doing this with us. Take care of yourselves and have a great